Thank you, Brother Cito. Thank you, because this is probably the one and only time I'll ever be in the same sentence with the apocalyptic author. Around here at that time, so thank you very much. God bless you. Speaking of being ready, there will be a review handed out in your groups for next week's exam. And I'm telling you, this is an excellent exam review, because we're rather than covering every single possible angle that could be covered in an exam, the author of this final review focused on the most important items that are worthy of review in a short time. And so I assure you that if you follow these guidelines, which are outlined in 3 brief pages, the exam will be related to it in an almost direct way, if not completely direct way. That's an ambiguous way of saying, take the review, and you'll talk about it in your groups. Follow it step by step to go back and look at your notes, go back and look at some textbook references, go back and look at some New Testament references, to refresh your mind of the things that you have already been learning through active action each and every week, like Brother Cito implied in his reflection tonight. You will be fine, and use the guide to prepare yourself for next week. So more on that at the groups. Also at the group, you should submit your Pauline exegetical paper. Your teaching assistant will be ready to receive it. I will receive Keith Roberson's, I will be with Keith Roberson's group today to receive your papers. I will promptly hand them off to Brother Cito, who will be seeing Keith on Saturday. And so you don't need to worry that Pastor Keith will receive your papers in a timely way. And the TAs and I have agreed that we want to, after your exam next week, hand back to you those graded papers, so you know how you did on your paper before the course is done. And then we are going to be meeting as a team on May 11th to collect the grades from the final, and then I take all that information and determine a final grade, which you will have by the end of May at the latest. So there is a plan, and you have an outstanding, I've been working at this is my 6th year, and about 4th time I've taught New Testament intro. And with all due respect to my previous TAs, who were also wonderful, this was a great group. And I'm very thankful for that. Thank you. And so you can be assured that we have done due diligence, and that we will do due diligence in adjudicating a good grade worthy of your time and effort. I know people complain about grades, particularly if it's not one to their liking, but you can be assured that all of us work very hard to give fair grades. I don't give grades away. I work very hard, very judicious, so that the grade that you will receive reflects the work that you put into it and reflects our care in determining the final grade. So you can be assured of the seriousness with which we take the task of grading. I've been teaching since 1995, and so I know grading is an important part of my work, and happily sharing it with my worthy teaching assistants. So please know that the grade that you will receive is one that we take seriously and determined. I'm going to say amen, but I may not want to say amen to that, but anyway, there it is.
Amen.
Send the sheet around.
that brings us to tonight's class. Miraculously, I think I've given myself enough time to give enough time to the book of Revelation tonight. And surreptitiously, is that a word? Serendipitously, excuse me. Surreptitiously. With serendipity, Brother Cito has anticipated some of what I will say in the latter half of class tonight. So thank you for that reflection. But last time we left off in terms of general epistles with 2 Peter and Jude. I'm not going to say much about it. My notes are fairly extensive. No, they're not fairly extensive. They are adequate for what you need, what I think you need to know, plus what you read in the Amer textbook about 2 Peter and Jude. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, the author of the essays in 2 Peter and Jude, let me check, because I know she wrote about 1 Peter, Dean Perkins. No, David Bartlett, another fine New Testament scholar. These are some very, really good scholars who write in the Amer textbook. Yes, Dean Perkins is one of the great Petrine scholars, and she's the author of the 2 Peter and Jude essay, two separate essays in the book. But these two letters ought to be, these are the three things I want to say about 2 Peter and Jude. And they're in my notes. They should be read together. 2 Peter incorporates verses, what is it? 3 to 13. Almost with commentary. No, it's adjusted. And the last PowerPoint slide from last week's session that you have in your notes from last week, or it's online, simply showed you the parallels between chapter 2 and 2 Peter and Jude, right? Yeah. Where with adjustments, right? 2 Peter did not copy it word for word, but the echoes of Jude are in 2 Peter, and the theme is essentially the same in both in Jude and in 2 Peter 2. Now 2 Peter has other materials, particularly in 2 Peter 3, he's concerned about the loss of trust in the return of Christ. So by the end of the first century, Christians all over the movement were saying, where is Jesus? The apostles are gone. What are we going to do now? And so they were planning for a long future. Already, 50 years, now you can imagine us 2,000 years later, but already there was a waning eschatology, a waning belief in the parousia and the return of Christ. And 2 Peter and 2 Peter 3 tries to correct that. And so does James in chapter 5. Right? They're both interested in sort of reinvigorating an eschatology in a community that's simply trying to survive in the midst of external persecution and pressure, as well as internal conflict, theological and otherwise, right? So these are communities in stress with just getting by each and every day. And the authors of 2 Peter and James and 1 Peter are trying to remind them there is this Christian belief for the last 100 years or 50 years in the return of Christ. Obviously, it's been later than we expected, but we need to hold on to that belief. So 2 Peter 3 is interested in a renewal of belief in the parousia and the return of Christ. 2 Peter is interested in the moral laxity, therefore, that he sees in the community, and he turns to a brother author, the letter of Jude, to help him structure an encouragement and a denunciation of fellow believers who are not believing and behaving as they should. So both Jude and 2 Peter share this strong word of denunciation. They're not talking about non-Christians, they're talking about fellow Christians who are not living the way they should, in the strongest possible terms. Jude, a bit stronger than 2 Peter. 2 Peter modulates a little bit, but he is commentating, if you will, extrapolating directly on Jude 3 to 13. So the two letters, although different authors, are worthy of joint dialogue and interaction. The incorporation of Jude, the concern about the second coming in 2 Peter, and this denunciation of what Jude calls, directly Jude 4, false Christians, false teachers who are in fact false Christians. And part of the problem was license without law. That is, this is a good word to know, not for your exam, but just in general. I'm going to ask you about it. Antinomian. If you're like Paul saying, don't worry about the law of Moses as a means of justification, people are going to take that as do whatever you want. So it's an antinomian attitude. No law, I got license to do whatever. And of course, Paul himself finishes Galatians in Galatians 5 and 6 with, yes, you are free, but freedom has responsibilities. Right? There are virtues that you need to exercise. Love, grace, forgiveness, right? The fruit of the Spirit. You got the Spirit, it produces good stuff, not bad stuff. Paul in Galatians 5, 13 to 26. Well, nonetheless, this notion that nomos, law, doesn't count for salvation, which is an exaggerated way of putting it, has its problems. You can sort of forget about good behavior in some understanding. And so Jude denounces such an attitude, and 2 Peter follows suit. I've already said this, and I'll say it again. It looks like, and Shane Perkins says it nicely at the beginning of her essay. Let me see if it's at, shouldn't waste time looking for this, but I just thought her way of putting it, well, it's not really somebody else. But anyway, the point is that you have these late first century churches invoking the memory of great apostles, James, Peter, Jude. Jude is not so much a great apostle, but he's a brother of James, right? You have these late first century communities invoking the names of the great apostles in order to help them project apostolic authority for the things they are teaching. This in itself is nothing bad, right? Some of you might be familiar with the Bart Ehrman Introduction to the New Testament that I've used in the past. And he says, well, it's still untruth to use the names of the apostolic authority, except that it was sort of like a practice, a literary practice, right? To use the names of great figures, and everybody understands that that's what's happening in order to say, like I said in the past, if they were here, this is what they would teach us. Oh, these are teachings of James, Peter, and Jude. And of course, we'll talk about that in a little bit, John. So we needn't fear that. Don't make a big deal out of it in Sunday school, but you, as a well-trained seminary student, need to be aware that for the most part, the general epistles are either anonymous, letter to the Hebrews, or pseudonymous, the other general epistles that are named after Peter, James, Jude, and John.
I did email this question to you, and I asked.
You sure did. That was you, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What a great question. Ask it again.
I asked, did the recipients of the letters knew that these letters were pseudo-apocrypha or not?
Yeah.
Or, and if they did, what was their reaction to it? What did they do?
Excellent question, and that is the $64,000 question, right? Are these pseudonymous to the point of being obviously written by local current authors in honor of past heroes, or are they trying to slip one by?
No,
They're-
more like the
Okay.
community, when they receive them,
Right.
do they know?
Yeah. That's, I'm putting it in a different way, but yeah, that's the point. So, I would argue that the communities were aware that they were not trying, that they were aware that this was a literary technique, because they would have known that these figures are long gone, right? And that these letters that they're receiving are not somehow, because that's the other option, and Bart Ehrman sort of promotes this option, that these are sort of archival things, found. Oh, look what I found that the apostles left behind. Right? Then we've had, we kind of have real problems if these current leaders are trying to deceive their communities, right? I think that what the community what the leaders are doing is reinterpreting teachings of the apostles for a new day and using the apostles' names. But it's obvious to the community that's what's going on. But not everybody agrees with that take on it. It's an excellent question. You put it in a different way that even was more problematized or complex. I want to go back and see the original. No, that's all right. That's all right. I owe you an answer. If that was the question, then that's the answer. No, I think they knew. Right? But not everybody thinks that point of view, which presents a whole set of other problems. Are these leaders trying to deceive their communities? That's now the other part is, of course, that these texts survived and were preserved. Was the preservation motivated by a belief that the authors were apostolic figures, right? Or was the preservation motivated by the power of the teachings in them? Okay. The canonizers, 300 years later, we never talk much about canonization, and I always try to leave a little room for it, but I really don't have time for it. But canonization took centuries to develop. The church began to keep lists of things, of documents they thought were authoritative. But the key to canonization is what documents survived for hundreds of years, right? The canon was finally decided in the year 367 CE, right? Meaning, some 300 years after Paul and Peter's death, for example, right? Was when the church met, the bishops met in northern Egypt. Right? That's why when you read about things that happened to Coptic Christians in Egypt, I mean, this is an ancient church, right? This is in the early part. You'll learn this in Church History 1 with Dr. Irving. In churches, in the earliest part of the church history, Egypt was important for the development of Christianity. Okay, and it was in Egypt. I forget exactly where. It may have been Alexandria, where the church met and made a decision about what was the canon to look like. That was based on 300 years of preservation of these documents, either because they were apostolic in origin or apostolic in teaching. Right? People knew that this came directly or indirectly from apostolic figures. Okay? The original 12 and the like. Okay? Except that some of those apostolic figures had passed when some of these communities decided to write in their name, in their honor, and in reinterpretation of their teachings. So canon is a process, and the process ends in the late 4th century CE, when the bishops got together and said the church for 300 years has been preserving and copying and sharing and determining that these texts, 27 among many, are the ones that belong. 2 Peter and Jude had a hard time getting in, but they didn't seem to have, other than these denunciation of fellow Christians who were wrong theologically, they didn't seem to have strong theological value. But they get into the canon. The next book we're going to study in about half hour, the book Revelation, had a hard time getting in as well, but for a whole different set of reasons that I'll discuss when we get there. So your question led me to a whole bunch of other things, so thank you.
I have a quick question.
You have a question, please.
Who exactly are the audiences of the, for example, First Peter, Second Peter?
Church communities
Just church community.
in particular geographic areas. First Peter, Bithynia, looks like Northern Asia Minor. Right? Hebrews we're not sure about. It looks like it was written from Rome, but we're not sure to where. Right? And we're not sure about Jude and Second Peter as well.
So we don't know if like the letters are actually read out loud in a church community or?
Well, we're pretty sure that in the early part of the history of Christianity, these documents are being read out loud. Much like what you saw people do with the Luke thing. I mean, these are performed texts. Right? There's a whole section of biblical studies that's called performance criticism, right? Where New Testament scholars sort of reenact what it might have been like to have the book of Revelation read out loud to communities. So we think, and and the evidence lies in the oral nature of the documents. Right? Those who are narrative critics, critics of orality, who study these things a bit more than I do in terms of how they read, how they read as oral texts, right? Can detect in them their orality. Obviously, we don't have video or tapes from those days, but what we do have is the texts themselves, and then text critics looking at these texts and saying, this was most likely written to be read out loud. Because look at what it does here, and look at what it does there. Look at this particular way it's written. It looks, and the way it's divided, and the way the emphases are. Critics of orality who are Bible scholars, right? They study sort of literature, right? Literary theory, and they figured out, these are, and this is the literary theory piece of New Testament scholarship has been going on since the 1970s, so about 40-something years, we've realized the orality of these texts.
So it was like one copy of one letter, multiple copies being read in multiple locations.
That's right. So the letter arrives somewhere and to one community and is read, and the community says we need to send this over to our sister assembly, a few miles away, and so they make copies and they send it along. And then, of course, this copying goes on for centuries,
right.
And we don't have any originals or anything. But, if not for the instincts to copy and circulate, we wouldn't have a New Testament. So that's critical. Thank you. Let's turn our attention then to the Johannine literature. You saw that I gave out the lecture. There's no PowerPoint tonight, no PowerPoint for this part of the class, the course, which is the final part of the course. So these are my lecture notes that you can refer to. Obviously, I'm not going to read them to you. But I'll just walk you through this and ask questions at certain junctures or bring up issues in your groups. So, again, we come back to the question of authorship. And the Gospel of John is a beloved gospel, right? And well it should. Right? Where else? Hey, it's John 3:16. For God so loved the world. It's in this beautiful, extensive gospel, as we saw at the beginning of the course, so different from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, for a variety of reasons that we'll think about. But why John? And the theory is, and I tend to subscribe to it, that the community founded by John of Zebedee, one of the 12, the one who's referred to at the end of this gospel, toward the end of this gospel, several times as the beloved disciple, right? The one who stands with, at the end of this gospel, Mary, Jesus' mother, who is commended the mother commended the son, John. He's called the beloved disciple. So over time, the tradition, since John of Zebedee sort of disappears from the narrative and instead is referred to as the beloved disciple. The tradition developed, rightfully so, that in some shape or form, this document, this gospel, is related to John of Zebedee, one of the 12, the beloved disciple, as referred to here. So, and what I'm saying is that in instances where in the synoptics, John of Zebedee is mentioned, toward the end of John's gospel, that name is replaced with the reference, beloved disciple. But, more likely than not, John of Zebedee did not survive to write the gospel in the form that we have it. Rather, and indeed in John chapter 21, right, this epilogue at the end of John's gospel, we have the risen Jesus referring to Peter and reaffirming his leadership by saying, "Do you love me?" I mean, this is the Peter that a few chapters before denied Jesus. And then we have the questions in John 21. Do you love me, Peter? 3 times, to sort of as a way of reaffirming the leadership of Peter. But there also is this text in there about an explanation of why John of Zebedee didn't last forever. Why did he die so early, apparently? And then there's, well, Jesus didn't say that he was going to live forever. He said that, his impact was going to be long-lasting, right? And sure enough, his impact is long-lasting because his community survived the fall of Jerusalem. And if you go to the city of Ephesus, and you see the ruins of Ephesus in Western Asia Minor, right on the shore, almost on the shore of the Aegean Sea, all right, you have a basilica, the ruins of a basilica built in the 5th century CE with the help of the emperor then, right? His name escapes me. And then in the 12th century or 13th century, there was a major earthquake, and this basilica was destroyed. But they found it, the ruins of it, and it's the Basilica of John. And then you will go up a little hill, a big hill, actually, and at the top of that hill is a chapel. And it's a chapel dedicated to Mary, and there are plaques all over that chapel that say, Mary, the mother of Jesus, lived in his house with John the Evangelist. And so there's this whole tradition built around Christian community in Ephesus, and we know it was a strong community. Right? And that part of that community was, of course, part of it was related to Paul, right, who we know for sure evangelized there. But part of that community was related to the Johannine community, the community founded by John of Zebedee back in Palestine. But by the time the tradition around that community and that community itself, the community founded by John, escapes Palestine, and remnants of it apparently ended up in Ephesus, and all kinds of dedication and symbols of that all around the ruins of the city of Ephesus in current-day Turkey, with the basilica at the bottom of the hill and the ruins of it, because it got torn apart by an earthquake in the Middle Ages, and but they undug it, right? They dug it up, and then this chapel and prayer wall dedicated to Mary and to John at the top of the hill. So all these traditions indicate, plus others, I don't have time to unpack, indicate this long-lasting, impactful Christian community related to one of the great apostles, John of Zebedee, the beloved disciple. And that community, over time, the theory goes, collected the teachings of John, who of course was an eyewitness of Jesus of Nazareth, and preserved John's teachings over the decades until the late part of the 1st century, around the year 90. They collected and edited and told the story of Jesus in the words of John, in the way John would have taught it, in this beautiful gospel that we know as the Gospel of John, the Gospel of the beloved disciple. This community, in another moment of crisis, with terms and words and vocabulary that very much echo the themes of the Gospel of John, we find writing a series of epistles, of letters. I'll tell you about those letters as well that we know today as 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. Now these are powerful stories. For me, it's more powerful, maybe not for you, but for me, I think many of you will resonate with it as well. It's just a powerful story to think in these ways. And by the way, the best book about this, still, 30 years later, is Raymond Brown, the preeminent Johannine scholar of the previous generation and still a beloved figure. He used to teach across the street at Union Seminary, Raymond Brown. And he wrote a monumental 2-volume commentary that you'll find in the reserved room in the Burke Library, the Anchor Bible Commentary on John, 2 volumes. And he wrote the history, what do you call it? The community of the beloved disciple. I cited in my paragraph here. And he's the one that's convinced the rest of us, with very little dissension, that this understanding of this long-lasting Johannine community founded in Palestine somewhere shortly after the death of Jesus, one of the disciples, the beloved disciple, organized this community. It fled after the war and found itself in various places, including Ephesus, and produced this beautiful gospel and these 3 epistles. Now, you'll see in this sheet the themes that dominate the Gospel of John. What is church? Ecclesiology. Church is the presence of Jesus now among friends of Jesus. And there is this us and them language in the Gospel of John with the Judeo being the enemies of the community. Now we've got to be very careful with this term. The term Judeoi, I do it twice. And the hard I, Judeoi, yes. Because it's usually translated the Jews. As if the Gospel of John is accusing all the Jews in Palestine of being the enemies of Jesus and Jesus' disciples, his friends. And of course, that kind of ascription, Matthew has it as well, has caused all kinds of havoc in terms of Christians relating to Jews, including, things like the Holocaust, horrible things that happened in Germany in kind of World War II and before and since. Not as horrible as that, but anti-Semitism. What if we took this more literally and think in terms of Judaism? In other words, another way of translating that word is leaders of Judea. People with decision-making power, people who collude with the Roman overseers in Judea. Judea is a province whose capital is Jerusalem, the capital of all of Israel, right? And remember, Israel was divided into Judea, Galilee, and a few other provinces, and the Romans drew the lines. Right? But Jerusalem was the center of Jewish culture, and those people in charge of Jerusalem, political and religious leaders, were called Judeoi, the Judeans, that is, the religious leaders and political leaders of the community. So, who are we, the Gospel of John asks, as the friends of Jesus, as the disciples and followers of Jesus? Who are we as we engage the opponents of Jesus and our own opponents in this day and age? We are ecclesia, the church. A unified community that together deals with the current presence of Jesus in our midst through the Spirit in anticipation of a future. And so the ecclesiology of the Gospel of John is tied to what is known as a realized eschatology. The already as well as the not yet. That wonderful phrase in John 4 and 5. The time is coming, but now is. So John's gospel exudes this sense of a collapsed eschatology. As John 10 indicates, we are already living the abundant life that is to come. So it has a realized eschatology. It doesn't assume that we are anticipating a future reign of God in all its consummation and future judgment for those who are not friends, but rather enemies of the gospel community. Yet it believes in the alreadiness of that future expectation. So a collapsed, realized eschatology is part of John's theology. And that's why it's so important to do the rites, R-I-T-E-S, the symbols of this community, which are baptism, Eucharist, and foot washing. John's gospel is a gospel that has Jesus washing the feet of the disciples in the Last Supper. And many communities still practice foot washing ceremonies around the time, Maundy Thursday, the time of the Last Supper during Holy Week. It comes directly from John's gospel and the community's emphasis on these symbols of a community that's awaiting a future consummation of the kingdom of God, but it's already being lived and enacted in life and ceremony, in love for each other. The emphasis on loving one another in this gospel. So in ecclesiology that circles the wagons around friends of Jesus, that's the term used a lot in John's gospel for disciples. And then a theology that says the future is already here, enacted in ceremonies such as baptism, Eucharist, an extended description of the Eucharist in John's gospel, because the community was exercising that in a serious way. So let me put it to you this way. You're writing a credo, let's see, spring 2017, first year, for the MDiv students, second year, third year. So whatever, 3 years from now, you'll be writing a credo, and you'll be searching around for texts to help you write your ecclesiology. I invite you to think about John's ecclesiology as a conversation partner for how you would describe the nature of church as you move forward in your ministry and in your theological reflection, because it is a powerful one, as well as its eschatology, this already not yet. That's number one. Number two, I want to say to you that this means that even more so than Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John's gospel, as Origen, the church father of the 2nd century, called it a spiritual gospel. You might love John's gospel, and I always remember that when I adjuncted in a Latino Episcopal seminary, and a Latino program of Episcopal seminary not too far from here, many years ago, they had me teaching Gospels in Paul, but they wouldn't let me touch John's gospel. Part of it was I wasn't much of an expert in John's gospel. The other part was Episcopal church, with all due respect, loves John's gospel. The liturgy, the sense of worship, the solemnity, the focus on ceremony, baptism, Eucharist. I mean, these are things high church churches like the Episcopal church love. So they didn't let me get close to John's gospel in their program. They had an Episcopalian teacher. Right? So John's gospel is not a synoptic gospel because it takes the teachings of Jesus to the level of theological explanation. I mean, there are, of course, incidents healing stories. I'll say a bit about that in a moment. But for the most part, when Jesus encounters Nicodemus, that story that didn't make it in the other gospel, made it into John's gospel, that moment of encounter takes off into a whole theological explanation of the meaning of Jesus for salvation. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. That is a reflection of this community about the teachings of Jesus as they wanted it to be understood. Salvation is what Jesus was all about, because God loved the world. It's a theological reflection on the stories of Jesus. In this case, the encounter of Jesus with Nicodemus. And you see that throughout the gospel, explaining itself for the Christian community of John surviving in the decade of the 90s. 60 years after Jesus, probably 30 years after John had died, right? Apostles are not around to do this expansive reflection in ways that the community needed. The community, the authors, the editors, the author, we're not sure if there's a collection of editors working on John's Gospel, but they put together this beautiful ecclesiology, liturgy, and eschatology in explaining the teachings of Jesus. But it doesn't have a structure. It doesn't have a birth narrative, but it explains that Jesus pre-existed in the form of a logos, a word that was involved in the creation of the earth with God. The prologue of John 1, the famous prologue of John, the beginning, was the logos, active word that then becomes incarnated. If you're looking for a theology of incarnation, you have to look to the church fathers to sort of get the explanation of it, but it has its roots in John 1. This fleshiness of the word, the spiritual word, in the person of Jesus. It's a theological statement that transcends describing the stable, the trip of Mary and Joseph. It goes from historical description to theological explanation, meaning Jesus is the incarnate Word of God. Powerful, beautiful, but it's theological abstraction of gospel stories. But then it goes on to tell the story, and we've divided it into two parts. We, Johannine scholars that I read a lot and study as well the Gospel of John, namely the notion of the book of signs and the book of glory. This community believed that Jesus and God were one. The high Christology. So when you write the credo 3 years from now and you want to develop a Christology, John's Gospel might be a resource, because here, this Gospel determines, in the great diversity that is the Second Testament, right, determines that we need to emphasize the divinity of Jesus, his oneness with God, which of course leads to, later on in the history of the church, a Christology that says he was both God and human in one. John's Gospel moves the envelope in that direction with this notion of Jesus healed because he was one with God. And the stories of Jesus' healing are carefully selected by the authors or author of John's Gospel. The stories are carefully selected. They are in fact 7. 7 stories. And then he doesn't use the word miracles. He used the word signs. Semea. To make it clear. This just points us in the right direction. It's not the end all. That's how John 20 ends. Remember I started the course with that text, right? These things are written so that you might believe that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of God. John 20:30. And what are the stories? Among several, only 7 healing stories, some of which are in the other Gospels, synoptics, the food miracle, and a couple of others. But notice where it starts. What are the bookends of the 7 healing stories that are called signs that demonstrate God and Jesus being one? Turning water into wine. Okay. Jesus' control over just everyday matters of life. And transcending that, at the other side end of the spectrum, the last miracle in John 12, the resurrection of Lazarus, which of course anticipates the resurrection of Jesus in John 20. Okay. So you go from John 2, wine, water into wine, then the feeding miracle and a few others in between, and then John 12, the resurrection of Lazarus, before the final journey to Jerusalem, which ends in the resurrection of Jesus in John chapter 20. These are signs that Jesus and God are one. A major theme in John's Gospel. And then the book of glory, which is really 2 parts. The farewell discourses to Jesus' disciples, where Jesus takes them aside and convinces them that they must stay unified in the midst of opposition. And then he tells them, at the beginning, 13 and 14, then he tells them, you won't be alone. It also includes, of course, the famous passage, I'm not going to leave you alone, I'm going to go prepare a place for you, but in the meantime, you have the Spirit, the Paraclete. Paraclete means one who stands beside you. Actually, who's called to be by your side. Parakletos. Called to be by your side. And that's the descriptor that John's Gospel gives to the presence of the Spirit on an ongoing way with the believers. So that's the first part of the book of glory. The second part is really what the glory is all about, which is John's Gospel is not limited to resurrection, which is obviously a glorifying of Jesus that even death could not keep him down. But John's Gospel also refers to the crucifixion as a glorification because of its implications for the salvation of humanity. So 13 to 20, the heart of and notice that John's Gospel does not have this pattern of the synoptics where Jesus does Galilee first and then travels to Jerusalem and then does Jerusalem. The turning of the tables is not a miracle, but it's one of the first things that happens in Jesus' ministry. The turning of the tables in Jerusalem in John's Gospel happens at the beginning of the ministry. Because the authors of John's Gospel, the editors or the author, we're not sure, says from the beginning Jesus was going to confront Jerusalem. From the get-go. It wasn't planned. Already in one of his visits to Jerusalem during Passover, Jesus confronted the temple and said, you're not doing your job. And then that faithful ending is played out in the rest of the gospel story. The epilogue, I'll take your hand in a second. The epilogue, after the main part of farewell discourses and of course death and resurrection, 18 to 20, the book could end with resurrection. And the resurrection witness, by the way, is Mary Magdalene. Right? She's the one that witnesses the empty tomb, witnesses the risen Lord, and then this was recently the lectionary, I believe, John 20. And then not only the witnesses, yes, this was the Easter Sunday reading in many Protestant churches, John 20. Mary Magdalene, and I heard a wonderful sermon from my pastor about that. So Mary Magdalene is the one who's the first witness of the risen Lord in John's Gospel, and the first apostle, the first storyteller or evangelist of the resurrection. And the book could end there, but the author said, we're going to add to the resurrection story this sort of encounter of Jesus with Peter and with John and with the other disciples, and we clarify then Peter's role, but also the role of the beloved disciple in John 21. So if you all were to study John's Gospel as the years pass by, you will learn from it the singular focus on Jesus, the Christology of Jesus and God being one, the death of Jesus being a glorification because of its implications for human salvation, eschatology that is not just future but also present, and the Spirit as the ongoing presence of Jesus, the one who is beside you. This gospel helped the early church fathers and mothers to develop what became Orthodox Christian Christology, incarnation, ecclesiology, pneumatology, study of the Spirit, and eschatology. All while talking about disciples and Christians as friends, as this joint, unified community that loves one another deeply. That takes an interesting twist when a few years later, apparently, the Johannine community is facing concrete, complex theological issues to which it responds with these 3 short letters toward the end of the New Testament known as the Johannine Epistle, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. We'll talk about those in a minute, but let me take a question.
I was just thinking about in the farewell discourses, I guess, with John 14 and 6, where we're clear about Jesus being the way, clear about him being the life, but can you just give me a little bit about the truth?
Well, this is a theme in John's Gospel, and it shows up again in the epistles, right? Part of what we are about, says the Johannine community, is truth. And for this community, truth is to be found in the teaching of Jesus and in the person of Jesus. So it's a gospel and a set of epistles that wants to theologize about abstract notions from Greco-Roman philosophy, truth being one of them, aletheia, truth, and truth, as the philosophers are thinking about it and worried about it and talking about it and writing about it, particularly the Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle from centuries before, they're still in play, right? In the first century, including at the end of the first century, and so Christians have a take. They have a statement, they have a philosophy, they have a theology, an ideology about what truth is. And it is to be found in Jesus. So it's that kind of theological affirmation with the influence of Greco-Roman philosophy who are asking these questions. What is truth? Christians are saying truth is to be found in Jesus. One more question before I move on. Andrew?
In the glory part of the Johannine Gospel, the final discourse with truth, isn't it also maybe a restatement, another way of Logos? And Logos is also truth.
Absolutely.
Jesus prayed in the 17th chapter of John, thy word is truth. This is the law, the logic, the rule, the word of God, the reality of God.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the Logos theme is throughout, although different terms are used. Truth, another love in itself is a kind of outworking of this ultimate Logos, ultimate reason, ultimate truth. It's a very philosophical text, John's Gospel. That's the point to be made. And the other thing about Logos, the Logos passage, that is comparable to the wisdom passages in the book of Proverbs. So if you go to Proverbs, and it talks about Sophia in the Greek translation of Proverbs, the Greek Bible, you look at the themes around wisdom in the Proverbs, and there are passages, I forget which, in Proverbs that have their parallel, or the Logos text in John's Gospel has its parallel with proverbial sayings about the power of wisdom of Sophia, and of course its relatedness to the divine. Right? And so the Logos theme, the Logos term in John's Gospel is kind of parallel to the Sophia terms in the Proverbs. And scholars are sort of seeing that comparison between Sophia, wisdom in Proverbs, and the Logos, and its adjudicant terms in the rest of John's Gospel. I need to move on and just say a few things about the epistles before I turn to Revelation. The keys, I can't do it all in one paragraph, but the keys to understanding the epistles are their relatedness to John's Gospel. The same community that produced the Gospel produced the epistles, although in a different form. Not a Gospel now, but some of the teachings of the Gospel are replicated in a different form in the epistles. And Raymond Brown teaches, and I tend to agree, that what happens in the epistles is that the Johannine community is facing a crisis of faith, a theological crisis. And the leader of the community, who is not to be identified necessarily with the beloved disciple of the gospel, but rather he's called the elder. The anciano. The leader of the community at that point in its history determined that the theological problem is serious enough that I need to write a set of documents to the community. It's not the first time that a bishop or a pope or anybody writes encyclicals, writes documents to the community in crisis. And what this, now somehow in the history of transmission of these documents, they became 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. But I'm convinced that the best way to read them is the other way, backwards. 3rd John is a cover letter for 2nd and 1st John. And the cover letter says, it endorses, commends the community's leaders, who are even named, Gaius and Demetrius. Gaius, the local church leader, to whom 3rd John is directed, and Demetrius, the letter of the carrier, the bearer of the letter. And the elder says, these are good people that you should pay attention to. That's 3rd John, summarizing it very good. 2nd John is a letter, more general, to the elect lady. Now, if you study commentaries about these Johannine epistles, you'll get various takes on who the elect lady is. A local leader who happens to be a woman. More likely, it's a metaphor for the church as a whole. So, 3rd John, the elder writes to the local, endorsing the local leaders, Gaius and Demetrius. 2nd John, he addresses the church as a whole. So Demetrius, the letter bearer, shows up with these 3 documents. And in the first one, that's read out loud, the elder tells the church, pay attention to Gaius and Demetrius. They're good leaders. They have their theology straight. Right? Give them hospitality. Then 2nd John says, dear church, my elect lady, or God's elect lady, the elect lady, the church. And then he lays out the themes more broadly that he then addresses in detail in 1 John, which is not really a letter, right? It doesn't have the epistolary features if you look at it, right? It basically is a theological essay defending the position of the elder. 2 John, by the way, also rejects hospitality for believers who do not believe what the elder is trying to teach. So you read 2 John, you have this notion of do not give hospitality to people who don't believe that Jesus came in the flesh. And then that's 2 John, then he elaborates that problem in 1 John. 1 John essentially says, if you do not confess that Jesus came in the flesh, and I'll give you the references there, then you're denying the humanity of Jesus. You are being a Docetus. Doesn't use that term, but that's how the theology of it develops. And what is Docetism? From the Greek word dokeo, which means to seem. To seem like. Some Christians were saying, given that the human body is so frail and weak, how could it be that our Lord and Savior came in human form? They were, according to the elder, denying what the gospel taught in chapter 1, that the Logos became human flesh. They were denying it instead of confessing it. And therefore, Jesus seemed to be human. Human flesh, human body, embodied Logos. He seemed to be that. But he could only be spirit, because we know that only spirit can be divine. And this Docetism, as the church fathers and mothers began to refer to it, is a theology that becomes unorthodox, rejected, and heresy, thank you.
Heresy.
And the author, the elder who wrote, whoever he was, the elder who wrote 3rd, 2nd, 1st John, his endorsement of the local leaders who got it right, his encouragement to the church to get it right, and his theological explanation for why it's right to believe not in Docetism, but in a fully human, fully divine Logos in Jesus Christ. That's 1 John elaborates that, and you have the text in front of you. So these are internal debates in the community of John. John's community, 30 or more years removed from his life and times. The community is debating things. And one of the things they're debating is, what was the form of Jesus' first arrival? There's very little said about the second arrival of Jesus in the Johannine community. In these epistles, doesn't seem like it was a concern, too much of a concern of this community. But they did want proper understanding of the incarnation. Incarnation means the Logos became human flesh, humanity, an embodied divinity in Jesus.
Is it safe to assume that today in this community today, for most non-Christian believers, that's their argument, to kind of go against the grain of Christianity, that he wasn't divine, he wasn't of God?
Sure. There's all kinds of, including Christian theologies that have problems with the notion of the divinity of Jesus, right? So they think Jesus was a great, powerful historical figure who did much to teach us about, remind us about the teaching, the heart of God's teaching and love and loving one another, as the gospel and the epistles put it. But to think that this was God among us, other than in sort of theoretical, philosophical terms, that doesn't fly. So, yeah, there are the opposite of Docetists in Christian theology today. I would say maybe even in this room. But that's 2,000 years removed from the Johannine community's struggle, which was rejection of the inhumanity, if you will, of Jesus. Okay. He could only have been a spirit that looked human. That theology was rejected. And of course, over time, Orthodoxy included a strong belief, like Colossians, like John 1, like John's whole gospel, about the divinity of Jesus, the full-out divinity of Jesus, right? And most Christian Orthodoxy accepts that theology. So yes, there are people that argue the other way. Was that your question? Well, okay. And over here.
Yeah.
Then I have to move on.
Docetism.
Docetism. Yeah.
Docetism and Gnosticism.
Yes, they're related but different.
They're related but different. Okay, Gnosticism primarily concerned with enlightenment through knowledge.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
Docetism primarily concerned with the spirituality and not believing in the resurrection or the sacrifice that Jesus made at Calvary. That was the argument or the conflict.
That's another theological
That's
problem.
another-
It could be that there were Docetists who do not believe in resurrection,
Uh-huh.
but of some form. You know, obviously, if you don't believe that Jesus was human, then you have a problem with a restored humanity, because it's not, you know, something else. Resurrection is something else, and what it would be in a Docetist theology, I'm not sure. But you're right. Yeah, I mean, the logical outworking of a Docetistic theology is no resurrection, because it's not a human form that needs to be restored.
But salvation is gained even though there's no resurrection.
Right, they believed in salvation, and of course the Gnostics believed that salvation was human enlightenment of the divine, personal, with or without church. So that was rejected too, right? The Gnostic notions, which were later. There's instances of it in the New Testament, but for the most part, the Gnostic issues you will learn in your early church history course, because it's more of a 2nd and 3rd century phenomenon within Christianity that eventually was rejected, including at the canonization stage, where many Gnostic texts were not only rejected but burned as completely heretical. The notion that your individual spiritual experience with the divine, some special knowledge, is what gets you salvation. That notion was also rejected, as was, and they're interrelated, but it's two separate issues. I need to go on to the book of Revelation for about 15 minutes, if you will. So I'm going to take a little bit extra time for our group session. But not without suggesting in the last bullet on page 5 of my Johannine Epistles presentation, that because these texts, both of them, even the ones in the epistles that have this sort of internal conflict going on, and Christians battling Christians over theological points of view, that both the gospel and epistles promote loving one another as the prime virtue of being a follower of Jesus. This sort of pervasive love that transcends all of these human interactions. So much so that the wonderful New Testament scholar Alan Callahan wrote a book, next book, that he called A Love Supreme, A History of the Johannine Community. I think that's what the subtitle is.
Alan.
Somewhere. And what Callahan suggests, you know, the gospel reads, with his emphasis on loving one another, it reads like a response to the internal conflicts in the Johannine epistles. So I don't agree with it, but I still think it's a powerful notion. He inverts the order chronologically and says the gospel of love, gospel of John, the love supreme, yes, he is echoing John Coltrane. The love supreme of the gospel of John is a response to the epistles. Not that that's the prima facie document to which the epistles refer to once and again, right? So I agree with it, but it's a lovely notion. And Alan Callahan wrote a wonderful text about Philemon, and then this wonderful text about the Johannine material that is worth having in your library. The book of Revelation. Traditionally, it's taught toward the end of the class, not just because it's the last course, or the last book, but also because it's part of the Johannine, for some, it's part of the Johannine tradition. Whoever wrote John's Gospel, wrote John's Epistles, wrote the book of Revelation. Right? I don't think that's the case. John's Gospel and John's Epistles are really anonymous. I mean, except for the reference in John's Gospel to the beloved disciple as a source for the teachings of John's Gospel, and the reference to the elder in the, so I guess it's not anonymous. The elder, whoever he was, is the author of the epistles. Right? But that's different from what we have in the book of Revelation, where it actually tells us who the author is. Revelations 1:9. That would be a great question in the test. According to Revelation 1:9, who is the author of the book of Revelation? Then I will put James, Peter, John, and you never know. You never know. So look at Revelation 1:9. You know I don't write my exam until after this class, so I haven't written it. All kinds of ideas come into my mind. 1:9. I, John, your brother, who share with you in Jesus the persecution and the kingdom and the patient endurance, was on the island called Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. As we say in Spanish, más claro no canta un gallo, which means a rooster can't be clear. Doesn't sing any clearer than that. Who is the author of the book of Revelation? John of Patmos. Who was John of Patmos? Well, we don't know exactly who he was, but he was some kind of Christian leader exiled to the island of Patmos, which is off the western shore of Asia Minor. In other words, if you go directly across the Aegean Sea from Ephesus or one of those towns, you get to Patmos. A small little island, also known as a kind of prison island. Right? So, who was the author of the book of Revelation? This fellow who was a leader and calls himself a prophet, or refers to his document as a prophecy. Who does he write to? We learn from chapters 2 and 3, he writes to 7 churches in Asia Minor. Philadelphia, Laodicea, Ephesus, a few others. What's the one that is the current day Izmir, Turkey? Anyway, it's one of those there. So 7 churches in 7 different cities, all of whom are going through a series of persecution, doubts, theological and otherwise, and they need help. And John, their exiled leader, writes back. And chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation, that we don't have time to unpack, simply say you need to hold on in the midst of the persecution and hard times that you're going through. So they read like a Pauline letter. Right? They're epistles packed into 2 chapters in the middle of something bigger. And that something bigger, as I outlined in my notes, and as you read in the wonderful Barbara Rossing, the last chapter in our Amer textbook, who wrote a highly accessible, readable little book about the book of Revelation. If you read this, you will never read the book of Revelation the same way ever again. Sort of like an expansion on her chapter in this book. It's called The Rapture Exposed, the message of hope in the book of Revelation. Barbara Rossing, who's the author of the Revelation essay in the Amer textbook. And basically, she takes on late 19th century British interpretation of the book of Revelation, which is called, I'll remember it, and the Left Behind novel series.
Yeah.
She says, these are aberrations. I used to be more diplomatic, but I decided not to. These are aberrations of the meaning of the book of Revelation. Books that reject the literary tool that is the book of Revelation, for of all things, give consolation to persecuted Christians of the late 1st century in Asia Minor, very specific. We take seriously those 7 churches as churches under stress and responding differently to the stress. Now, part of the stress was this, which is why the book takes on a few interesting things, including Babylon, the Roman Empire, its insistence on being worshipped, and therefore it's a reference to the Roman imperial cult. If you wanted to do business with Rome, this is going to sound familiar to some of us. If you're going to do business with Rome, you have to go to the altar of the emperor in your town, Ephesus, Philadelphia, Smyrna, that's the one. Smyrna is current day Izmir in about an hour north of Ephesus. So in Turkey. So you have, if you wanted to do business in these towns, you needed to go to the local altar, sacrifice to the emperor, get a sign that you had done that, and then you can go take care of business, make a little money. Commerce. The denunciation of merchants throughout the book of Revelation who sell out to their Christian faith that way is strong and, of course, violent. So that's one of the fundamental presenting issues. Martyrs, Christians are dying, not just because of not going to the imperial cult, but of denouncing the requirement, the religious requirement, that is of course political, to go to the altar, pay homage to the emperor, and then make some money to survive, to eat. And John of Patmos, an exiled Christian leader, precisely because of his resistance to the movement, to resistant leadership in this resistance movement to the emperor cult. Now, why wasn't he executed? Most likely because he had, given that you can see his education, he probably had some high social status, right? And he probably was not executed in deference to his social status, but exiled. Don't bother us anymore. He goes to Patmos and he writes these letters, except that he writes this larger text. And what is this larger text? It's an apocalypse. And in our opening devotional, we had a reference to the meaning of the word apocalypse, this unveiling of God's truth for God's people. And the Jewish world, after the Babylonian exile, right up until 100 years after this, had a myriad, many apocalypses. Some of them named in honor, most all of them anonymous, because who would want to expose themselves, right, as an author of a resistance document, a document that resists imperial control over religious practice for the good of economics. Who would want to expose? So they're anonymous. They invoke the names of Enoch and Moses. They have titles like the Assumption of Moses, right? The 12 prophets of Jacob, or something to that effect, of Abraham, excuse me. So these are Jewish texts, 200 years before and 200 years after the turn of the century, or 100 years after the book of Revelation. These are Jewish texts that said to imperial control, whether Babylonian, Greek, or Roman, said, we will resist because we serve the true king, God. So they have this sort of surreptitious, mysterious language of resistance with visions and dreams and worship in the heavens, and a focus on numbers to show the mystery and precision of God. We may not know what we're doing, Rome may not know what it's doing, but God knows what it's doing. Because it's 12 prophets, and 12 apostles, and 12 tribes of Israel, and this number, and therefore there's going to be 144,000 who survive. Not exactly, but symbolic of faithfulness. 12 times 12 times 12, whatever the math is. These are symbolic texts written large. The violence, to many of us, is, but the community was facing violence, martyrdom. The lions in the Colosseum, in the games, right? In the not Olympic game. What am I thinking about? Coliseum, yes, but in the gladiator games, right? The lion, Christians being thrown to the lions, as well as other groups as well. So this is real martyrdom, violence being done to innocents, and so the Christian prophet John of Patmos determines that he's going to console and exhort his persecuted community to stay faithful against all odds. Yes, violence is being done to us, but one day, of all things, the Lamb of God is coming back.
So where did they come get the 144,000 that number from?
It's symbolic of 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles, so it's a math problem.
Confusion in church.
We don't know how many are going to survive. Right? But 12 times 12 times 12 times, it's 144,000. So it's just using numbers as imagery.
In this book, she kind of breaks it down. This is one of our readings where she breaks it down, and she even goes into saying how Christ and the triumphal fight and defeat Satan and his team. But it's in the book. I was trying to find it as you finish.
Okay, good. So you have this symbolic imagery language. Here's another one, right? The stamps, the trumpets, and the bowls. Now, why do we got to have 3 sets of 7 things? 7 stamps, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls. Right? When 7 has its own symbolic meaning, right? In many ways from the Hebrew scriptures and elsewhere. By the way, the book of Revelation is best read by Hebrew scholars, by Hebrew Bible scholars, okay? Because it doesn't really quote Hebrew scriptures directly, right? It sort of alludes to many references. So the best interpreters, including some of my friends, Jean-Pierre Ruiz at St. John's University, Gregory Beale of Gordon Cowell, the best interpreters of the book of Revelation are Hebrew Bible scholars as well, because of all the allusions to the Hebrew scriptures. But why these stamps, seals, and trumpets, or stamps, trumpets, and bowls? I mean, part of it is these are the kinds of images in other apocalyptic literature, right? These things are sealed, or they don't play, or they're covered up until the right moment. And then at each uncovering, something happens. Bad people die, or good people die, but the promise of resurrection is around the corner. Right? All of these sort of descriptions of what happens to the faithful and what happens to the enemies of the faithful are embedded in these long texts. And it's, after the letters to the churches, we have a scene in heaven, right, with the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 the apostles present there. And then you have John envisioning this and hearing a voice that says, "Who's going to help us? Who's going to help us?" And then, of all things, not a lion, but a lamb shows up. Representing a bloody lamb.
Yeah.
Representative of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And what? He's going to help us? Yes, he's going to help us. Okay. And then we turn to the judgments. Stamps, the trumpets, the seals. And as I noted in my notes here, the thing is not to try to figure out the meaning of each and every unsealed stamp, blown trumpet, or uncovered bowl. The key is not, but to take it all in. And just when you're ready to breathe and receive final judgment and the triumphant Lamb at the 7th seal, more judgment and more troubles come. And then you get the trumpet. And surely the 7th trumpet is going to unveil the final judgment, the end of history where we know it, vindication of the suffering believers. That's it. A trumpet is loud enough to bring this all to an end. But no! then the bowls come. And they are even worse in terms of judgment and violence. And by the end of chapter 16, you're saying to yourself, when is relief coming? And then it starts. And even that takes a while, right?
Yeah.
You get the fall of Babylon in 17, Rome. It's a political declaration that the empire is going to disappear. The cause of our suffering is the empire, Babylon, and it is falling. Then later on you get the dragon, the sort of power over Rome, Satan, tied up. And then you get a millennial, a symbol of Christian and divine sovereignty on earth. Because the earth is worth rescuing. And Barbara Rossing, in both of her pieces here, make a major point. She's even been to conferences where she's argued that Revelation is not an denunciation of the environment, is not an denunciation of the earth. The millennial period of peace on earth is symbolic of care that everybody, including Christians, need to take for the earth. So it's an environmental statement in sections of the book of Revelation, argues Barbara Rossing. But then Satan is let loose of all things. When you think it's over, Satan is let loose. The millennial period ends until he's finally captured and thrown into the lake of fire. And then the end comes, and we get the new Jerusalem and the new earth. Well, this is not all going to happen in heaven just then, but a new Jerusalem and a new earth. This prophet is comprehensive in terms of his care and concern for what God cares about, which is heaven and earth in the new Jerusalem depicted at the end of this book. Follow the logic of the symbolic world. When things look bad, they might get worse. We need a lion, we get a lamb. Be careful of the feminine imagery in the book of Revelation, because most of the time it's negative, whores, but there are these moments where Revelation 12 in particular, this woman adorned with the 7 sons, or the beginning of Revelation 12, which was obviously a reference to Mary, and then a child is born, right? A reference to Jesus, so it's Revelation 12. But the book of Revelation has a problem with misogyny and the sort of negative imaging of the female figure. But that has to be adjudicated carefully in our theologies of women and men in ministry and all of that, the book of Revelation. And of course, we have to modulate the violent imagery. How many millions of dollars have been made in the movie industry with this apocalyptic imagery represented in the book of imagery and the book of Revelation as an end time theology. We have to carefully interpret for the world that this is a document written in the tradition of Jewish apocalyptic literature, Christian apocalyptic, in face of persecution by real people. It's imaged fantastically, but it's real people suffering in these 7 cities in Western Asia Minor in the decade of the 90s under the leadership of the Emperor Domitian, who orders apparently systemic persecution of Christians, at least in Western Asia Minor. So these are historic realities that are responded to by this Christian prophet, John the Patmos, by means of an ancient Jewish symbolic text, literary type known as apocalyptic literature. He uses the imagery to send a message that even when things get at their worst, the least expected intervenes with hope on our behalf, a bloodied lamb. It's a powerful text, rightly interpreted. It is not, and my time is really up, it is not the book of Revelation. a program, step-by-step program
Yeah.
of a yet unknown future. We cannot, I cannot say this in the strongest possible terms, we cannot do what Darby started us on in the late 19th century, with the periodizing of Christian history. Right? Taking the 7 weeks of Daniel and turning it into an exact historic program, and that we're living somewhere in between the 6th and the 7th week. So that the 7th week is what the book of Revelation. This is one man's interpretation, a fellow named Darby, that then got iconographed, deified in the famous Schofield Bible, 1902, around there. And so dispensationalism, dispensationalism became the theology of early 20th century Christian pockets of Christianity, particularly evangelicalism in the U.S. and in England, in the English-speaking world. And then the Schofield Bible got translated into Spanish, so that we Puerto Ricans got the brunt of this theology in Pentecostalism in Puerto Rico, New York, and elsewhere. We need, I mean, this is not an easy book to interpret, but I encourage you to read Baba Rossi, read the book of Revelation almost entirely as a symbolic text of what happens when Christians suffer, God intervenes, even if death also comes to us. God is still a sovereign God, and we should have hope. Easier said than done, and obviously John, a very thorough analysis in order to say it in a way that was let me say this way, and then we'll get to your point. If 666 was, I don't know, Adolf Hitler, then it meant nothing to the first readers of this book. And how fair is that?
Nothing.
666 referred to the sign that you had gone through the imperial cult in the first century. That's what it meant. Some people interpret Nero's name somehow relates to 666. It's not about something that isn't happening yet. Right? So we have to be very careful about giving this book of Revelation its due. It's a historical, theological statement of late first century Christians who attempt to survive in the face of intense persecution. And such is the diversity of the New Testament that you get the story told in the form of a gospel, you get the story told in the form of epistles, you get the story told in terms of an apocalypse. Remember what I said at the beginning of this course. Different literature types in the New Testament calls upon you to interpret differently depending on what you are reading.
I just want to say thank you for clearing up something that I had no understanding of. And I even visited the Kingdom Hall on different occasions at High Holy Time. And it's on page 75. She does a really good job explaining it, but they take it literally. And after every message, they go into this. And it is literal for them. But I'm glad you cleared it up saying that it's symbolic, because now I can understand it better. Because it does not relate. I could not make the connection. Now I know why, because it's symbolic.
Good.
But it's on page 75.
Great. 75 of the Rossing piece in our book. Friends, our time is up.